On the first morning, Ranger Leah Mercer. On the first morning, Ranger Leah Mercer saw it just after 5:40 a.m., when the sky over Black Ridge was still dark blue, and the floodlights over the equipment shed made the frost on the gravel shine like broken glass. She was alone outside, unlocking the fuel cage with a thermos tucked under one arm, when something moved beyond the chain link and made her freeze mid-step. At first, she thought it was a large dog. Then the animal stepped into the pale cone of light and turned its head. And the shape of the face, the long legs, the heavy winter coat, the amber eyes, all resolved at once. A wolf. Young, lean, maybe a yearling, with soot-darkened paws and a narrow chest that made it look not weak but unfinished, as if it had grown fast and was still catching up to itself. It stood just outside the fence line and watched her with a focus that raised the hairs on the back of her neck. It didn't pace, it didn't snarl, it didn't bolt when she moved. It simply looked at her, then looked down the service road leading uphill into the burn scar, then back at her again. Leah had worked wildfire recovery long enough to distrust any animal behavior that looked too meaningful. People loved stories. Forests loved consequences. A wolf at a station fence could mean many things, and most of them were not magical. Displacement from the fire, disrupted prey routes, curiosity, habituation to human structures after months of smoke crews and machines in the area, injury, hunger. Still, when she called softly toward the garage for Mason Ortiz, and the wolf stayed put instead of vanishing into the timber, she felt that strange pressure in her chest that comes before a hard decision. Mason stepped out carrying a coil of hose, saw the animal, and stopped so abruptly he nearly dropped it. "No way," he whispered. The wolf flicked an ear toward him, then took a few quick steps along the fence to the gate and made a short, breathy sound. Not a bark, not a full howl, more like an impatient whine. Then it trotted 20 yards down the road, stopped at the bend where the surviving pines gave way to blackened trunks, and looked back over its shoulder, as if checking whether they were coming. Mason stared at Leah. "Did you see that?" Leah kept her voice flat, because procedure was easier than awe. "I saw a wild animal moving through a human structure. That's all." But she did not believe herself. By the time station supervisor Tom Breyer arrived, the wolf was gone. Leah wrote it in the morning log anyway, and got the expected raised eyebrow. Black Ridge had been strange since the fire. The August lightning strike had started 3 separate runs that merged into one fast-moving wall under wind shift, and for 10 days the mountain became a map of orange lines and radio traffic and dozer cuts and air tanker schedules. 30,000 acres burned before containment. Whole drainages lost cover. Root systems cooked. Springs silted. Animal movement patterns scrambled. Leah could still smell old ash in the soil after rain, and every patrol into the burn scar felt like walking through a place that had survived but not healed. Wolves had been tracked in the North Unit before the fire, a small pack the state biologists monitored loosely. After the burn, sightings dropped, then scattered. A few prints in mud. One camera clip of a gray shape crossing a road at night. Nothing that told a clean story. Leah finished the shift, telling herself the fence wolf was one more fragment in a season full of fragments. It came back the next morning. This time, Dana Kim from State Wildlife happened to be at the station before dawn to swap memory cards in a trail camera cluster. Leah had barely poured coffee when Mason hissed from the dispatch room window, "It's back!" The wolf stood in almost the same place, just outside the fence opposite the vehicle gate, body angled toward the road. Dana crossed to the window and went still. "Yearling," she said quietly after a moment. "Maybe 10 months, maybe 11. Leah glanced at her. "How can you tell?" Dana pointed without taking her eyes off it. "Leg length, face still narrow, chest not filled out. It's young?" As if aware of being discussed, the wolf stepped closer to the chain link and stared directly toward the building. Leah could see old mud caked on the lower fur and a nick on one ear. It looked alert, but exhausted in some hard-to-define way, the way young animals look when they've spent too long on adrenaline. Then it did the same thing as the day before. Looked uphill, trotted down the service road, stopped, looked back, waited. Dana muttered under her breath, "That is not random." Tom, who trusted Dana but distrusted leaps, folded his arms. "Or it's learned there are people here and people move around on roads. Don't make a message where there's just pattern." The wolf returned to the fence and made that clipped whine again. Mason, who was too young to hide what he felt, whispered, "It wants us to follow it." Tom gave him a look. And that sentence is exactly how people end up in incident reports. Still, no one walked away from the window. They watched the wolf repeat the behavior 3 times over the next 15 minutes. Fence, stare, road, look back, wait, pulled into the yard, and engine noise pulled into the yard, and engine noise shifted the whole scene. Leah tried to focus on work after that, but the image stuck. That evening she reviewed maps of the upper basin, not because she had orders to, but because the service road the wolf kept indicating led toward a drainage they had flagged after the fire for unstable snags and erosion pockets. No active closures beyond the posted warning signs. No crews scheduled there that week. Colder, a hard pre-dawn bite that made colder. A hard pre-dawn bite that made breath smoke in the floodlights. Leah was outside with Tom checking chainsaw maintenance logs, while Mason loaded trail barriers into the utility truck. Dana had stayed overnight in the bunk room because she was doing a 2-day camera sweep. The wolf appeared at 5:32, earlier than before, trotting straight to the fence with no circling approach. It looked thinner in the shoulders than Leah remembered, or maybe just more frantic. It paced the chain link this time, 5 steps one way, 5 steps back, tail low, ears forward. When Leah moved toward the gate, it stopped and stared so intensely she felt the moment physically, like stepping into a beam. Then it ran down the road farther than it had before, nearly to the first switchback, and came back at a lope. At the fence, it whined sharply, pawed once at the ground, and ran again. "Okay," Dana said, voice changing from curiosity to decision. "Something's wrong." Tom swore softly. Could be a lure. Could be a den nearby. Could be a carcass, and it's guarding. Dana shook her head. Then it would display differently. Look at the ears. Look at the retreat distance. It wants eyes on something, and it's checking if we're still here. Mason looked from one to the other. So we go? Tom hated being pushed by circumstances he couldn't fully categorize, but he hated ignoring field anomalies more. We assess, controlled, daylight only, full kit, no one alone, no cowboy nonsense. They moved fast once the decision was made. Radios, med kit, trauma bag, bear spray, ropes, hard hats for snag zones, hand tools, satellite beacon, thermal scope, camera kit, and 2 utility trucks because post-fire roads were unreliable and nobody wanted one vehicle stuck if the weather turned. Tom notified dispatch of route and estimated return. Dana briefed everyone at the gate in the cold blue dark while the wolf waited beyond the fence and watched as if timing them. We do not approach the wolf. We do not corner it. We follow the direction of travel only if behavior remains consistent. If it leads us into a high-hazard snag patch, we stop and reassess. If we find a den, we withdraw. If there's an injured animal, we call state response and hold perimeter. Nobody improvises with a wolf. Mason nodded too hard. Leah handed him the extra trauma gloves and said, "Breathe." At 6:08, they rolled out through the service gate. The wolf moved off immediately, not sprinting away, just maintaining a lead. It stayed visible at intervals in the headlights and dawn wash, a gray shape on the road shoulder or weaving between blackened trunks. The farther they climbed into the burn scar, the quieter the world became. No morning bird chatter, just the crunch of tires on cinder-laced gravel and the occasional creak of dead timber in the cold. The fire had stripped this drainage brutally. Slopes that once held dense pine were now ranks of charred poles. The ground was patchy with pale ash, exposed roots, and stubborn shoots of fireweed pushing through ruin. Leah had been here for hazard surveys and knew how deceptive it was. What looked stable could collapse underfoot, where root systems had burned out underground. Fallen trunks balanced on unseen voids. Rocks shifted because the vegetation that held them no longer did. The wolf paused at each fork, or bend long enough to confirm they were still following, then moved on, never letting them close within easy range. "I hate how deliberate this is," Tom muttered from the lead truck. Dana, riding shotgun with Leah behind them, didn't answer. She was watching with the fixed concentration of someone trying not to name what she was seeing too soon. About 3 miles from the station, the road narrowed and became impassable, where a tangle of burned trunks had fallen across a culvert. The wolf had already left the road and was moving uphill through the black timber. They parked, radioed their position, and continued on foot. The temperature rose with the sun, bringing out the damp mineral smell of old ash and wet soil. The wolf's track line was easy to read in the pale dust between burned roots, fresh and direct. Leah moved in front with Dana, Tom behind, Mason carrying the trauma pack and a lightweight come-along, mostly because he wanted to prove he could be trusted with more than cautionary lectures. Every few minutes the wolf appeared ahead, waited in profile among the trunks, then slipped on again. Once it doubled back close enough that Leah saw the eyes clearly again and the burrs in its fur. It looked at Dana, then past her, then up the slope, and gave that same clipped whine. Dana exhaled sharply. "Keep moving." They reached the site at 7:02. It was a blow-down pocket in a shallow draw where several fire-killed pines had toppled downhill and jammed against a half-uprooted root plate, creating a tangled mass of trunks, branches, ash, and rock. The wolf stood beside the pile, pacing in tight circles and whining. The moment the team stopped, it darted to one side of the tangle and lowered its head toward a narrow opening beneath the roots. Then it looked back at them and paced again. Leah felt her pulse spike. "There," she whispered, though no one had missed it. Dana dropped to a crouch, listening. At first all Leah heard was the hiss of wind through snags. Then a sound came from under the pile, a rough scrape, a low exhale, and the faintest vibration of a growl too weak to carry threat. Mason's face went pale. Tom swore. Dana didn't move for 2 full seconds, then said in a clipped voice Leah had never heard from her before, "Adult wolf, trapped? Back everyone off 2 paces and hold." Leah angled her flashlight into the opening, carefully, and caught an eye reflecting gold from deep in the cavity. The adult female lay wedged under a burned trunk and root mass, one hind leg pinned at an ugly angle beneath timber and rubble. Her coat was matted with ash and damp soil. Her breathing was fast and shallow. She was alive, but only barely. The young wolf rushed to the opening and gave a low, trembling whine that the female answered with a faint sound from the dark. Mason whispered, almost not meaning to speak, "It's her mother." Dana nodded once, still watching the cavity. "Likely." Tom had the radio out before she finished the word. Leah listened to him call dispatch, and then state wildlife, and then emergency veterinary support. Voice steady, but faster than usual as he relayed coordinates, hazards, species, entrapment, and need for authorized intervention. The nearest wildlife vet with sedation capability was at least 90 minutes away if roads held. State biologist team, maybe an hour. Too long, Leah thought immediately, then corrected herself because panic was useless. Dana was already assessing the tangle. "We can't hand extract with her conscious. We also can't wait passively if the structure shifts. She's pinned, But if that load settles, she's done. The yearling paced wider now, stressed by voices and movement, but it did not flee. It kept returning to the same side of the tangle, whining into the cavity, then staring at the humans. They set a quiet perimeter and did what field crews always do while waiting for the right specialists: control what could be controlled. Leah and Mason flagged the safest approach line through the snag patch. Tom documented hazards and coordinated incoming access. Dana studied the structure and identified which trunks were bearing load and which were only tangled. The cavity appeared to have formed after a post-fire erosion slump dropped part of the root plate and rolled a charred trunk into place. Maybe the female had crawled in for shelter. Maybe she was chasing prey. Either way, one rear leg was pinned, and the opening too narrow for a person to reach her safely. The yearling never stopped monitoring them. Twice it came within 20 feet, low and tense, then retreated. Once it stood directly across from Leah and just stared, chest heaving, eyes bright with something she refused to call pleading, because that word was too human, and yet no better one came. The response team arrived in layers. First a state biologist pair with immobilization gear, then Dr. Elise Warren in a mud-splattered state truck, carrying sedation kits, fluids, and the calm intensity of someone used to making difficult decisions in bad terrain. She took one look at the cavity, one look at the female's breathing, and said, "We do this now." There was no time for perfect plans. Sedating a trapped wolf in a tight, unstable void was risky. Too little drug, and the female could thrash and worsen the injury. Too much and respiratory depression in that confined position could kill her before they freed the leg. Elise worked from the opening with Dana and Leah shielding the line of sight, estimating dose by body condition and angle. The yearling circled the perimeter, whining in bursts, every muscle in its body strung tight. Mason stood with the jacks and cribbing, jaw clenched, waiting for the signal to move. The dart landed clean. Then came the wait, the longest 6 minutes Leah could remember. The female growled weakly once, shifted, then settled as the sedation took hold. Elise checked reflex depth with a probe from the opening and nodded. Go! The next 40 minutes were a masterclass in controlled urgency. Tom and the biologists stabilized one trunk with straps anchored to a surviving snag. Mason and Leah slid cribbing blocks under another to prevent a sudden drop. Dana called out load changes as ash-soft soil crumbled from under the root mass. Twice they had to stop when the tangle creaked and shifted. Once Mason's boot punched through a hidden burn void, and Leah yanked him backward by his harness strap before he dropped thigh-deep into a cavity. Nobody spoke above a murmur. Nobody wasted movement. The yearling stayed outside the work arc, pacing, whining, vanishing uphill for seconds at a time, and returning immediately to the same view line on the cavity, as if unwilling to lose sight of either the trapped female or the humans working on her. When they finally raised the pressure trunk enough to free the hind leg, Elise and Dana slid in a padded board, and Leah reached just far enough to support the female's hips, while the others eased her backward through the opening. She came out in a shower of black bark and damp ash, heavier than Leah expected, ribs sharp under thick winter fur, one hind leg grotesquely swollen below the hock. Elise moved instantly, checking airway, pulse, pupils, hydration, then starting fluids and pain meds. Crush injury? Maybe fracture, maybe both. She's alive because she's tough, and because she didn't burn energy fighting the trap. Dana glanced at the yearling. And because somebody kept her company. Elise followed her gaze and saw the young wolf standing a few yards away, trembling, silent now. "Keep everyone still," she said softly. "Let it process." For one surreal moment, the yearling stepped closer, while the female lay sedated on the tarp. It lowered its head and touched its nose to the female's muzzle, then flinched back at a radio crackle. Mason made a sound in his throat and swallowed it. Leah looked away briefly because she could feel emotion rising, and field scenes punished distraction. They splinted the injured leg, loaded the female into a transport crate, and coordinated extraction back to the trucks with rope handles and 4 sets of shoulders. The yearling shadowed them through the burned trunks all the way to the road, keeping distance but never disappearing completely. At the truck line, as they secured the crate, it stopped upslope in a patch of black snags and watched. Leah could feel its gaze while she tightened straps. She hated the part of the job where rescue looked, from the outside, like theft. They were taking the mother away because it was the only way to save her. The yearling did not have the context for that, only the fact of separation. Before climbing into the truck, Leah turned toward the slope and crouched slightly, not looking straight into the wolf's eyes. "We're trying," she said under her breath, absurdly, because there was no language between them except action and distance. The yearling held still for 1 heartbeat, 2, then turned and disappeared uphill. The mother survived transport. That alone felt like a gift. At the regional wildlife facility, imaging confirmed a hairline fracture and severe soft tissue damage, but no catastrophic vascular compromise. She was dehydrated and underfed, but stronger than her condition in the cavity suggested. State biologists identified her from old collar records as a female associated with the Black Ridge Pack, though the collar battery had died months earlier. The rehab plan was aggressive fluids, anti-inflammatory treatment, monitored rest, and a rapid release if she stabilized, because every day in captivity increased the chance of social disruption in the wild. Leah returned to station work, but none of them really returned to normal. Tom rewrote reports 3 times trying to make the incident factual without sounding either cynical or credulous. Mason told the story too passionately and kept getting corrected on details. Dana installed additional trail cameras around the rescue site and likely travel corridors, then checked them with the intensity of someone waiting on lab results. Leah found herself waking before dawn and looking automatically toward the fence from the bunk room window, half expecting to see the yearling there again. It never came back to the fence while the mother was in treatment, but the cameras caught it. Night 1. The yearling circling the rescue site, sniffing the disturbed ash. Night 2. The yearling and a larger adult male crossing a draw half a mile east. Night 3. The yearling resting for several minutes on a ridge overlooking the station road. Dana printed the still and pinned it in the office without comment. "That's not scientific," Tom muttered when he saw it. "No," Dana said, "it's morale." On day 6, Elise called with the news everyone wanted and feared at the same time. The female was weight-bearing, responsive, and fit for a controlled release back near the capture territory. Weather was holding. Snow was forecast in 48 hours. If they were going to do it, it had to be now. Leah volunteered before Tom finished asking. At dusk, they drove the release crate to a quiet draw less than a mile from the rescue site, where the burned forest opened into a slope with surviving timber and game trails crossing through new regrowth. The air smelled of cold earth and distant snow. Dana checked the wind. Elise administered the final reversal and stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the female stirred, lifted her head, and slowly stood. She favored the injured leg, but could move. She stepped out of the crate, turned once in a tight half-circle, and stared uphill into the black trunks. The world went still around her. Then from somewhere in the timber came a low, uncertain howl. Young, ragged at the edges, but unmistakably a wolf. The female's ears shot forward. She answered with a shorter call, rough but clear, and began moving uphill at a limping trot, disappearing between burned trees and patches of new grass before full dark settled. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Elise finally exhaled and said, "That's as good as this job gets." Dana wiped under one eye with the back of her glove and pretended she had ash in it. Leah just stared at the place where the female vanished and felt something unclench, that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying since the first morning at the fence. The official report, when it was filed and forwarded and archived, used cautious language. It described unusual yearling proximity behavior at a ranger station, subsequent field investigation, discovery of an entrapped adult, conspecific in post-burn blowdown, coordinated rescue, veterinary stabilization, and successful release. It did not say the young wolf came back 3 mornings in a row and waited by the gate like a sentry. It did not say it led them in stages, stopping to make sure they followed. It did not say Mason cried in the truck on the drive down and denied it later. It did not say Leah, who prided herself on hard lines between field biology and human storytelling, replayed the memory of that clipped whine at the chain link more times than she admitted to anyone. Some truths survive better in people than in paperwork. Winter settled over Black Ridge by December. Snow softened the burn scar into white drifts and black skeletons. Tracks replaced sightings, for those who had been there. One night in the winter of 1999, the yearling had stood in the snow, and the fence where the yearling had stood became just a fence again, except for those who had been there. One night in late January, Leah was pulling trail camera cards with Mason and found a clip time-stamped 4:57 a.m. in moonlight. A wolf approached the ranger station perimeter along the service road, paused near the gate, lifted its head as if scenting the buildings, then moved on without lingering. Leah played it twice. The hind leg showed a slight stiffness in the stride. "Her," Mason whispered. Leah nodded. Maybe the female was just crossing old territory. Maybe the station road had become part of a route now that the forest around it had changed. Maybe she remembered the fence, because memory in wild animals is often simpler and sharper than the stories humans build on top of it. Leah saved the clip anyway. Months later, when new seasonal staff asked about the framed still image in the dispatch room, a young gray wolf at pre-dawn, ears forward, eyes fixed on something beyond the camera, Tom would give them the professional version first. Post-fire displacement, entrapment response, interagency rescue. Then, if they stayed long enough and proved they could hold complexity without turning everything into myth, he'd tell them what the mountain taught the station that fall. Wild animals are not pets, not symbols, and not characters waiting to flatter human feelings. Most of the time, when they come near, it's because something has gone wrong. But every so often, in the wreckage after fire, or flood, or storm, a wild thing does something so precise and so impossible to ignore that your categories stop helping. And when that happens, if you're lucky and careful and brave enough, the right answer is not to explain it away. The right answer is to grab your pack, call it in, and follow.